On the evening of March 5, 2021, 30-year-old Matthew Dunmire walked out of a suburban Cleveland bar and got into a white smart car driven by an unknown woman. It was the last time anyone saw him alive. Earlier that night, Matthew had been drinking with friends after work, a casual Friday ritual. He seemed relaxed, even cheerful. When someone asked about his weekend plans, he smiled and said he was meeting an old friend from Virginia. He didn't mention a name. His friends found it odd. Matthew had been living with his longtime partner and their 2 young children, 5-year-old Caleb and 3-year-old Driana. He wasn't the kind of man to sneak around or keep secrets. Yet, that night, when his phone buzzed, he abruptly stood up, said his ride was there, and left. One of his coworkers followed him outside out of curiosity. He saw Matthew approach a small white smart car idling near the curb. Behind the wheel was a woman with dark hair, her face barely visible in the glow of the headlights. Matthew waved, got in, and the car drove off into the dark. By the next morning, he was gone. Matthew didn't come home that night, didn't show up for work, and didn't answer his phone. By noon, calls went straight to voicemail. His partner tried his friends. None had heard from him. The last message she received from him was at 10:49 p.m., saying he'd be home tomorrow evening. Then, silence. That night, his parents, Tommy and John Dunmire, filed a missing person report with the Hudson Police Department. Tommy, his mother, insisted that her son would never disappear voluntarily. He wouldn't leave his kids. He wouldn't just walk away, she told officers. Police began with routine checks: hospitals, jails, local motels. Nothing. No accidents, no John Doe cases. The white smart car was the only clue. By the end of March 6th, Matthew had been missing for over 24 hours, and what began as a routine check quickly turned into a serious investigation. On the morning of March 9th, 2021, 3 hikers walking through Cuyahoga Valley National Park noticed something unusual off the trail: a motionless figure lying among the leaves, just beyond the path's edge. When park rangers arrived, they confirmed what the hikers already feared. It was a man. He was dressed in a dark hoodie, jeans, a leather jacket, and fingerless gloves. A half-empty Aquafina water bottle lay beside him. There were no identification documents, no wallet, no phone. The body showed no signs of a struggle, no drag marks, no signs of robbery. Only one thing stood out: a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. The scene was quiet, undisturbed. It looked like he had been shot where he lay. Within hours, detectives from Hudson arrived. They suspected immediately that this might be Matthew Dunmire, the missing man whose case had been growing colder by the day. The next morning, forensic specialists confirmed it. Fingerprints and a small tattoo on his wrist matched the records. Matthew Dunmire had been found. He'd been dead for at least 2 days. The discovery shifted the case from a missing persons search to a homicide investigation. The question now wasn't where Matthew was, but who had killed him and why. Detectives turned their attention to the only lead they had: the white smart car and the dark-haired woman who had picked him up outside the bar. Reviewing surveillance footage from nearby roads, they located a white smart car driving toward Hudson at 5:46 p.m. on the evening of March 5th. Later that night, around 6:15, the same vehicle appeared on a gas station camera. Inside, they spotted Matthew, buying cigarettes, an energy drink, and a bottle of water, the same Aquafina bottle later found beside his body. That single piece of evidence, a cheap plastic bottle, would become the thread that unraveled the entire mystery. Investigators followed the trail north toward Cleveland. Using toll road data, cell tower pings, and Airbnb records, they discovered that the smart car had arrived at a rental house on Ashbury Avenue, booked under the name Chelsea Perkins. Chelsea Perkins was 30, the same age as Matthew. She had grown up in the same small Ohio town, graduated from the same high school, and later joined the U.S. Coast Guard. After leaving the service, she reinvented herself online, working as an adult content creator under the pseudonym Selena Savage. No one in Matthew's family or circle of friends had ever heard of her, but now her name was everywhere in the police files. The Airbnb host confirmed it. Yes, that man, Matthew, was here. He came with a woman, dark hair, stayed one night. Footage from a nearby street camera showed their smart car parked outside until morning. By 8:37 a.m. on March 6th, data from both their phones showed movement. They had left Cleveland together, driving south toward Cuyahoga Valley National Park. At 9:45 a.m., both phones pinged off a cell tower near the park's southern entrance. The signal from Matthew's phone disappeared 30 minutes later. That was the last trace of him alive. Later, forensic testing on the water bottle revealed two DNA profiles, Matthew Dunmire and Chelsea Perkins. It was the first undeniable proof that she had been with him at the site of his death. After the discovery of Matthew's body and the DNA match on the bottle, detectives zeroed in on Chelsea Perkins, the woman from the Airbnb. Chelsea was 30, born and raised in Ohio, a high school graduate from the same class year as Matthew, though they'd barely known each other back then. After graduation, she'd enlisted in the U.S. Coast Guard, serving several years aboard a patrol vessel in Texas. She later married, had 2 children, and eventually settled in Arlington, Virginia. When she left the Coast Guard, she turned to the internet to make a living, creating adult content under her stage name, Selena Savage. On platforms like OnlyFans, she built a modest but steady following, earning enough to support her family. To the outside world, Chelsea's life looked perfectly normal, even successful. But police records would later show that in the months before Matthew's disappearance, her communications had taken a strange turn. Sometime in early 2021, she reconnected with Matthew through social media. Friends would later say they had no idea the two were in contact. Their online messages, recovered later, began innocently, reminiscing about high school, catching up, but soon the tone shifted. By early March, she invited him to catch up in person while she was visiting family in Ohio. That trip, police later discovered, had been fabricated. The meeting was deliberate, planned. Phone records, surveillance, and Airbnb booking data painted a clear timeline. Chelsea had rented the Cleveland property a week in advance, using her real name and personal credit card. She had also rented a white smart car 2 days before the meeting. After leaving the Airbnb together on the morning of March 6th, the trail led directly to Cuyahoga Valley National Park, where Matthew was killed. What happened next, no one saw. But forensic evidence began to fill the silence. Under Matthew's fingernails were skin cells matching Chelsea's DNA. On his clothes, strands of her dark hair. And inside her own car, recovered weeks later, police found traces of Matthew's blood beneath the passenger seat. That afternoon, at 1 p.m., toll road cameras caught Chelsea's smart car heading north, away from the park and toward Toledo. From there, she crossed into Michigan, where surveillance footage from a Family Inc. tattoo studio captured her arriving alone. She spent several hours inside, getting new permanent makeup done, chatting casually with the staff. Quote, "She was calm, friendly, totally normal," one employee recalled. That same evening, she posted a selfie to social media, taken in the tattoo studio mirror. The caption read, "What an amazing weekend," tagging the tattoo studio. The post's geolocation confirmed she was in Michigan, just hours after Matthew had been shot dead. 2 days later, cameras tracked her car moving south toward Virginia, where she resumed her regular life, posting content, streaming, and interacting with followers as if nothing had happened. For nearly a month, Chelsea lived freely while Matthew's family waited for answers. On March 30th, 2021, armed with the warrant, FBI agents and local police searched her home. Chelsea answered the door herself, calm, polite, and seemingly unbothered. Inside, investigators found a 9mm semi-automatic pistol, legally registered in her name. Ballistics testing later confirmed it was the murder weapon. They also seized her phone, laptop, clothing, and a pair of boots matching footprints found near the park trail. By early April, the investigation had reached a standstill. Detectives were confident they had their suspect, Chelsea Perkins, and the evidence seemed clear: DNA, weapon match, motive. Yet legal complications, jurisdictional disputes, and delays in federal processing slowed everything to a crawl. Weeks turned into months. No arrest was made. For Matthew's mother, Tommy Dunmire, each day felt like torture. She had lost her only son, and now she watched the woman she believed had murdered him living freely, online, smiling, streaming, selling content. She was posting like nothing happened, Tommy later said in an interview. My son was in the ground and she was posting selfies. Tommy began calling the Hudson Police Department daily, demanding updates. Detectives explained the case was moving, but the process takes time. That phrase, takes time, became unbearable. In May, she started gathering her own information. She printed photos from Chelsea's social media, tracked her online activity, and even messaged people she thought might know her. Friends said she became consumed, unable to sleep, unable to think about anything else. Meanwhile, Chelsea continued to broadcast live, sometimes even discussing the crazy accusations people were making about her. In one video, she laughed and said, "People love to make up stories." That video would later be cited in court as one of the triggers that pushed Tommy past her breaking point. On the morning of June 18, 2021, Tommy left her home in Hudson and began driving south. In her car was a .38 revolver her husband had kept locked away for years. She stopped twice along the way, once for gas, once for coffee, before reaching Arlington, Virginia just before noon the next day. Surveillance cameras captured her car circling Chelsea Perkins' neighborhood several times before parking across the street from the small townhouse. At 3:47 p.m., Chelsea stepped outside, phone in hand, likely preparing to record another video. Moments later, neighbors reported hearing 2 gunshots. When police arrived, they found Chelsea lying on the porch, fatally wounded. The shooter, Tommy Dunmire, was still standing nearby, the revolver in her hand. She surrendered without resistance. In her first statement to officers, she said quietly, "I just wanted her to feel what I feel every day." The confession was immediate and complete. Within hours, news spread across Ohio and Virginia. Social media lit up with polarized reactions, some condemning the act, others calling Tommy a mother seeking justice. In a single moment, one tragedy had become 2. The shootings triggered a legal firestorm. Tommy Dunmire was immediately arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Her husband, John Dunmire, was also taken into custody for conspiracy and accessory charges, since he had assisted in the planning and transportation. Courts moved quickly. The case was complex, involving multiple jurisdictions: Virginia for the shooting, Ohio for Matthew's original murder, and federal agencies for the coordination and digital evidence. News outlets followed every development. Headlines ranged from "A mother's revenge turns deadly" to "Justice or vigilante violence." Family members of Matthew were devastated. His 2 young children, Caleb and Driana, now lost both their father and grandmother. Friends described the Dunmires as a family torn apart by grief and obsession. During pre-trial hearings, prosecutors presented a chilling narrative. Tommy had meticulously researched Chelsea's residence and schedule. She had borrowed and disguised herself in courier uniforms to avoid suspicion. The firearms were legally registered to her husband, John, who knew of the plan. The defense argued temporary insanity and overwhelming grief. Tommy had lived with the trauma of losing her son for months and felt the legal system had failed her completely. Psychologists who evaluated her concluded that while Tommy was mentally competent, she had experienced acute emotional distress leading up to the shooting. John's role was found to be complicit but passive, mainly logistical support under duress from his wife. The trial began in early 2022. Courtroom testimony painted a harrowing picture, friends recounting Matthew's last hours alive, digital trails confirming Chelsea's presence at the park, Tommy's obsessive monitoring, and the fatal shooting. Public opinion remained divided. Some saw Tommy as a tragic figure, driven by grief and a desperate need for justice. Others considered the act premeditated murder, noting that she knowingly traveled across state lines to execute her plan. Ultimately, the jury reached a verdict. Tommy Dunmire, guilty of second-degree murder, with mitigating factors reducing the charge from first degree due to emotional distress. John Dunmire, guilty of conspiracy to commit assault and accessory after the fact. Sentences were handed down. Tommy, 25 years in prison. John, 7 years in prison. Chelsea Perkins, meanwhile, remained in prison for the murder of Matthew Dunmire. Her eventual confession and plea deal had sentenced her to 27 to 31 years, ensuring she would not be released before 2050. By the end of 2025, the Dunmire family saga had left a lasting imprint on both the legal system and the community. Questions about vigilante justice, grief, and responsibility dominated public discourse. Many legal analysts debated whether Tommy's actions were a symptom of a systemic failure or a tragic moral choice. Matthew's children were left in foster care for some time, later adopted by extended family. The story became a case study in law schools and criminal justice seminars, illustrating the dangerous intersection of trauma, revenge, and delayed justice. In the end, what began as a simple night out, a meeting with a former acquaintance, spiraled into murder, vigilante justice, and lifelong consequences, leaving no true winners, only a trail of grief, lost lives, and questions that remain unanswered.